Welcome to the Craftsmen Online Podcast, the only 5-star rated Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York. The comments, opinions, and views shared during this program are of individual Freemasons and do not reflect the official position of a Grand Lodge, concordant body, appendant body, or Masonic authority. I'm your host, Brother Michael Arce, co-founder of CraftsmenOnline.com. A quick reminder, you can now listen early and ad-free with our new subscriber offer. Get the link to start your 7-day free trial in the show notes for this episode. This is a special episode, actually, for the Craftsmen Online podcast, as we're going to share a recent discussion that happened in the Craftsmen Online Reading Room, which is a Masonic reading group presented in a hybrid, so we try to do online and in-person format. These meetings focus on a reading selection from a Masonic book discussed by a panel of brothers during a secure Zoom meeting. Of course, our programs are free. They're open to all Masons in good standing, and those with an interest in the ancient and gentle craft and Freemasonry are also welcome. Additionally, we record all of these programs and put them on our YouTube channel. Just look for Craftsmen Online. In our most recent reading room that took place in June, our panelists, which included Right Worshipful Clifford T. Jacobs, Brother Jason Short, and the hosts, Right Worshipful Bill Edwards and Very Worshipful Michael LaRocco, discussed Wilmshurst, The Meaning of Masonry, particularly Chapter 5 is where they focused. And I'm going to hand things over to Right Worshipful Bill Edwards, one of the hosts of the evening, to take it from here.
And it's a fascinating book I first read back in the mid-1990s. Becoming a Mason at that time. And I've read it numerous times, and Brother Michael LaRocco and I have been going back and forth this week with, it's one of these books where you read it and then you read it again and you read it again and you take away a whole nother interpretation of it. And what we're going to be exploring is Freemasonry in relation to the ancient mysteries tonight. So Brother Michael, if you want to start off with the first question, jump us into question.
Yes, I cheated a little bit. In the beginning of the chapter, Wilmshurst mentions a couple of questions he's asking himself to see if the chapter itself answers. So we're going to use those as a format. So the first question for our panelists is, what was the nature of the ancient mysteries of which modern masonry purports to be the perpetuation? Mm-hmm. So, Right Worshipful Cliff, would you like to take that first question?
Sure. I mean, I think the ancient mysteries was a system whereby men were trying to understand what was happening around them in nature. I think there was an awareness that there was something greater than themselves that was the source of all creation, and I think it was to try to understand nature and to solve some of what we would call the mysteries of life. In a nutshell, I believe that's what the ancient mysteries were trying to do. And also, I mean, to go a little deeper, it's to make a spiritual connection with the divine, with the Creator, and a method or a way of sort of reconnecting with the Godhead, since that's who we are. We came into existence from the Godhead. There's a separation, and then the mysteries try to assist us in reconnecting. And I think Wilmshurst uses that term a few times in the chapter about reconnecting or reintegrating with the Creator, and a philosophy that you find in a lot of esoteric organizations still in existence today.
Yes, thank you, Right Worshipful Cliff. Brother Jason, would you like to add anything to that or answer that question as well?
Yeah. So Wilmshurst seemed to really ascertain that the ancient mysteries were a process of initiation where there was this conferral or transfer of consciousness and process of regeneration of the soul. And the process of initiation and this progression of man was sort of a way to bring us to a heightened state of consciousness from which humanity had once fallen away from. I mean, there are a number of different mystery schools and a number of different initiatory rites that existed in antiquity, and Wilmshurst does a good job of kind of leaning more into the Eleusinian, and then drawing a correlation to some of the early Christianity or early Christian structures that were laid out in about the late fifth to early 6th century. I really agree with him. I think that a lot of the ancient mysteries did something profound to the initiate, not only to bring them into the community, like we see with Judaism, or even in the Christian rites of communion and confirmation, but this process of bringing you into a much more real existence that doesn't err materially. The Greeks in their process had a lesser mystery school, which is much more of an exoteric rite, much more of a publicly available process of purification and initiation into the journey that you would go on to. The next step would become these greater mysteries, which involved a level of instruction. In the Eleusinian mysteries, the greater mysteries took the form of a 9-day ceremony that had a procession from Athens to Eleusis, had kind of a baptismal ceremony in the sea. It had a rite of purification and fasting that was then concluded with the taking of a kykeon, which is this sort of mixture drink that is believed to have been perhaps psychedelic. And through that process, those who have taken themselves seriously and those who are qualified would then be elevated to another plane of existence. Essentially, their minds would then be realigned to a world that is much more divine in nature and less rudimentary and materialistic as the profane.
Really, really, really interesting. Right Worshipful Bill, would you like to add your comments on that? Seems like this question is a good hot question. So
I like the what's been said, and I agree with what's been said. And I think what we'll get to it a little later, but the one word that Brother Cliff used was method, right? And then and Jason alluded to that as well. And I think that's one of the things that'll be interesting to see what we talk about through this is how one can apply a method or find a method within Masonry, right? To achieve this, because in a sense, I'm assuming the ancient mysteries had mentors, if you will use a modern term, right? They had initiates who would then help those coming through also become initiated. So I'm interested to hear a thought on that.
also, I forgot to mention, everyone, my apologies, is that some of the ground rules is that this is not a title lodge, so you have to govern yourself accordingly. So let's not breach that. Some of the things that struck about me, first I want to say that Wilmshurst's words in this chapter are so bold, but they resonate with so much profound truth, it's hard to deny. From this question, I see that what he was trying to say is that the ancient mysteries really are about teaching reincarnation. And the way he talked about it was that the reason why there has to be reincarnation is because this life is the only way you can improve yourself. Because when you go into the next life in heaven, it's a place of rest and refreshment, which reminds me of what the junior warden is governing over that time. And so coming here is the only place a person could perfect their soul or purify the soul. And he was pretty bold about Christianity, saying that Christianity was supposed to be the amplification and the fulfillment of the teaching of the mysteries. And that at the same time, he says that the churches became more occupied with material management than they were for the spiritual mysteries teachings. But yet then he says that the Orthodox and the Roman liturgies still have them beautifully perfected, the symbols still in them. And I found that very, very profound. He also mentioned something I found is very interesting. He says that the sense of equality among all men has been greatly abused. He talks about how there's a hierarchy of beings where there's icons and archangels and angels, and how that is a pecking order in reality. And we have kind of disintegrated that in a sense by our demonstration of trying to express equality. Of course, equality is extremely important and a profound spiritual teaching, but I think what he was saying is that maybe, if he was around today, he might call it the Me Too movement. It's a little bit of a downgrading. I'm not really sure what he meant, but I'm sure he was really more talking about the spiritual realm, but I found that pretty impressive. He also mentions that in the 6th century, there was a suppression of the mysteries. Mm-hmm. And that how Masonry silently is literally saying that the background symbolism is to try to evoke brothers or men to remember what this is all about, that we're spiritual beings and that we're supposed to perfect the true body, which is the soul, and not necessarily the material body. So I thought that was really, 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 really profound. And I apologize, Bill, you had another question you wanted to move to. So what was that next question?
Well, just he says it here, right? Are we to be nothing more than, emphasizing a few moral principles and elementary truths, which we know already, right? So most of, what we talk about in Masonry, we already say that, it's often said that we take good men. So if we take good men, then good men already probably know what we're teaching, right? So it's that question of, well, then what else do we offer? And in studying Wilmshurst and his other writings as well, he at first just, sort of dismissed Masonry. And then he started to read into it more. And then that's where he came to this conclusion. And in the writing, he alludes to this, that, it may not be perfect in its the way that it shares its light, but it is light that it still shares, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a, very interesting. So I'd just like to hear thoughts on that. That do we feel that the Masonry is a portal, if you will, to the mysteries? That by one coming into Masonry, that there's enough there, not revealing the quote unquote secrets or things that we can't share publicly, but that would help one become a true initiate.
It sort of brings to mind that portion of the ritual where we point to the volume of sacred law, and we admonish the candidate to faithfully, that his steps through life, that he faithfully is guided by the light he there shall find, and as he there shall find it. Nowhere along the way do we say that we're going to give the candidate the light. It's up to the candidate to find that light on their own. We don't just give it to them. They have to find it, which means they have to do the work. So I think in terms of in Freemasonry, a candidate's spiritual progression rests squarely with them. They have to do the work. And I think Freemasonry has elements of the ancient mysteries that can help a candidate, but we're not always very clear in pointing those aspects out to the candidate, whereby he can use Freemasonry along that path, which is why sometimes Masons gravitate towards other esoteric orders that's more practical, should I say.
Wilmshurst had entered Masonry when he was a young man. He was 22 in 1890 when he was raised to being a Master Mason, and he was, as Bill had mentioned, discouraged by the craft because it seems like there were a lot of brothers who just treated the rituals as some sort of formal ceremony of induction into a supper club, and he couldn't see what the greater point of everything was if it weren't something that you had to dig much deeper to understand. And he was really inspired by that. He dug into the rituals, where he did start to find these correlations with the ancient mysteries, though not perfectly preserved in any shape or form. The structure was there, and some of the symbols and tenets of our craft had these really compelling parallels to much more esoteric doctrine that existed. Now, Wilmshurst was then in his 50s when he released The Meaning of Masonry in 1922, which is several years after Joseph Fort Newton's The Builders was released in 1914, which we can only imagine he was somewhat inspired by. And in that book, Joseph Newton gets into how the craft does draw from like the Roman collegiate schools and these ancient building traditions, and that there was some level of spiritual doctrine that was preserved, but he kind of approaches it from more of an exoteric or known stance, and I think that really propelled Wilmshurst to dive deeper into some of what Albert Pike kind of got into with his research into ancient Sanskrit and his delving into the ancient Hermetic mysteries and the Eleusinian mysteries that were preserved here. I think that it's very interesting to see that from 1890 to 2023, we still exist in a craft where the majority of people who come through the doors to be initiated into our rituals, I don't think may have reason or may have been inspired or encouraged in the right way, or have a desire to dig much deeper than the surface understanding of the craft. But the presentation that we are given as Masons and the three degrees of entered apprentice, fellow craft, master Mason, and then on into the Royal Arch, they really are the embodiment of the lesser mysteries and the greater mysteries. And if you really apply yourself to the teaching, if you really apply yourself to digging into the code and the secrets that are pertained there, you can't help but to reach a new level of reality. You can't help but to enter into a more philosophical and spiritually enlightened state of mind, which comes from divesting yourself of your vices, which comes from getting a control of your passions, and comes from also learning more about the world, not only in the material sense that Western philosophy and science has presented as factual, but what is the philosophical significance of these? I love the point in this chapter, actually, where Wilmshurst gets into the liberal arts and sciences and the four virtues and explains them not just on their surface level, but what was the deeper, the more noble and glorious presentation or understanding of them.
That's a great point, Jason. You know, to answer the question that Bill had just answered is that does Freemasonry have today, I guess, if I'm answering correctly, the ability to communicate the mysteries, the ancient mysteries. You know, when I first went through the degrees, I'm going to say that I didn't think they did. I saw them, you know, I thought like, okay, so I'm not going to find any unique pieces of enlightenment at all here. But I think what had happened to me is that it was the affection of the brothers that drawn me in and kept me coming. And then I went to the Royal Arch degrees, and then I went to the Scottish Rite, and it was there that this triggered to me to realize that everything I was looking for, this very, very deep philosophical transformational system, was indeed there. And so it was more like the degrees themselves awakened me, they initiated me, but it was the communication with the other brothers that brought it to a very, very deep place. And so they were helping, and sometimes you go to a lecture or read an article, and then all of a sudden it makes a reference to a part of the degree. And it started to happen for me. I started to see it, you know, and I don't want to get into like this persona of esoteric eliteness. Like he literally says in it, a quote is, "Masonry today knows little of its true purpose." And I'm sure if he was around today, that his opinion would be magnified. So I'm not of a mind that if you don't understand deep esoteric information, you don't really know Masonry and you don't know what it's about and you're not a real Mason. Because frankly, to tell you the truth, there are some brothers that I know that have no interest in esoteric at all. Matter of fact, they have a disdain for it, but they would sacrifice their life for me. And there are those that have very profound, deep esoteric knowledge, but they're not very nice people. So I would say there's a lot to be said for that, but I would absolutely answer yes. But I've seen so many brothers that that miss the opportunity. So we have to catch them in programs like this, or if they dig deeper, if they read the books like the reading course, if they see lectures, or even see degrees in coordinate bodies. And again, you know, the coordinate bodies are not a competition to the symbolic lodge. They're an explanation of the depth of it. What really is there is absolutely profound. It always comes back down to the first 3 degrees. There's something that he quotes Plato, and Plato says, "For those that are not initiated, when they die, they are thrust into the mire and the darkness. But those that are initiated are allowed to dwell among the gods." So my new question for the panel would be, what is initiation? Right, Worshipful Cliff?
Well, you said a lot of stuff, and it's a lot to unpack. I want to touch on something first and foremost. A lot of times we use the phrase esoteric Mason. I'm an esoteric, or I don't like the esoteric. But I think to be a Mason is to be esoteric. Freemasonry in and of itself is an esoteric science. Whether you realize it or recognize it as such, it already is. So I don't need to call myself an esoteric Mason because I think that's redundant. I'm a Freemason. The esoteric is pretty obvious if you ask me, because we definitely are different from the profane. The process of initiation, it's an awakening. And I've come to think Freemasonry as somewhat of an outer order. The esoteric stuff is there, but I think it's the front porch. And I think if you really want to understand Freemasonry, you do have to explore some other things. And then when you go back and you look at, the symbolic lodge, it's like, aha, a light goes off because you have traveled to other places, seen other things, and then you come back and you look at the symbolic lodge with new eyes. So I see the symbolic lodge really as kind of an outer order. If you're familiar with Rosicrucianism under its various names, then you know that usually there's an outer order and there's an inner order. Well, I think Freemasonry in and of itself is somewhat of an outer order, and it's up to the individual, the candidate, to go further, but they have to do that on their own.
Well said, Brother Jason.
Yeah,
What is initiation?
I think that an initiation is a process of reincarnation. It's I think that Wilmshurst quotes the Apostle John in his saying, "I die daily," and in going through initiation, it gives us the opportunity to be reborn and then to die and be reborn again into a new, higher, elevated self. I think that in initiation, in the way that Wilmshurst presents it initially, is definitely more than just that. There are forms of initiation that are as simple as, all right, here's an orientation to this thing that we're doing. Welcome. Here's your badge. Here's your t-shirt. The buffet starts over there. I think that there is some of that exists out there, but the real heart of it is, I think, really becoming human. I think the process of going through an initiation is meant to instigate some sort of catharsis within the initiate that brings about a reincarnation of soul.
Before I ask Right Worshipful Bill for his opinion on what initiation is, I just wanted to add too that I love what you said, Jason, and what Right Worshipful Cliff said, but initiate also means to start. Like Cliff said before, you still have to do the work.
Mm-hmm.
Right Worshipful Bill?
Sure. So when I was reading this, one of the words that I was thinking about was the idea of mysteries. And what does a mystery mean, or how is that different? That we often think in terms of secrets within Masonry. What is the secret, right? Whereas mystery is something more. And I think just looking at the definition now, in practices, skills, and lore particular to a particular trade or activity, and is regarded as baffling to those without specialized knowledge. And I think that sort of captures that idea of what I think Cliff and Mason were alluding to, right? Of that, for those maybe who have traveled elsewhere but come back and see Masonry with new eyes, then maybe it's upon us to help our brothers in a way see things with new eyes. Because when you create that awareness or that awakening within them, I think you do stir something within their soul, right? You touch that inner part of their being, and then it comes down to them doing the work. So it takes it from being, okay, we're just going through these ceremonies but wow, have you ever considered this? And I think that's part of that. And then initiation is to start, but I also believe it's a journey, right? And we talk about rebirth and recycles and that. And I think you can come back to the same thing with new eyes over and over again. And it's that spiral evolutionary kind of thing for me. And, but what I came away was really thinking in terms of what is the mysteries of Masonry, and that whether it's a port or a portal or whatever you use, then how do we get ourselves to pass through that on that journey, and then to bring others with us? Because one of the things I'm concerned, Michael, you mentioned earlier about the hierarchy, and where I've seen that go awry is when we get into the idea of gatekeepers, right? Or that you only have to be of a special bloodline, or you have to have this certain knowledge, or you have to have something. And I think what's beautiful about Masonry is that we take all men, the high, the low, the rich, the poor, and realizing that that essential spiritual element is within all of us. So we're all common and it's there. And we may go further in our journey. Our journey may take us in different places, but the fact is we can all build our temple. And that's something that I came away from this reading this time of Wilmshurst writing. So thank you.
Excellent.
And if I could just make a quick comment,
Yeah,
I understand reincarnation, but I kind of embrace the word reintegration a little more. I think that we are trying to connect to something that's already within us, that we once were a part of, was separated from, and we're trying to reintegrate ourselves with. Perhaps it's a little bit of that, what Jung called the collective unconscious, that's in all of us, and we're trying to plug back into it. But I think it's perhaps for me, less of a reincarnation than a reintegration and reconnecting with something that we knew previously, but we have become separated from.
I really love that train of thought, brother, and gets into with the presentation of Demeter and Persephone, or Adam falling out of Eden, or just the fall of man, which Wilmshurst also explores here. I think that's a really wonderful way of putting that, and a really great way to frame the approach to it as well.
Yeah, there's also a part of the teachings in Buddhism and in some of the highest teachings of India called Advaita, which means it's Sanskrit for not two, is the ultimate realization. When you find out who and what you truly are, you realize you never had to reincarnate in the first place. Sometimes we have to go through all these things to realize we never had to go through all these things.
Brother Michael, I just want to comment to build on what Cliff said. One of the things in thinking about Wilmshurst, he said, looking at the deeper meaning of, for instance, Solomon's temple. And for myself, I've taken that to become a symbol of building my own temple, right? Mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, and then becoming more of a sacred space or perfected space or a whole space or whatever word you want to use, that can become much like the temple became a temple of the spirit could enter, right? The same with us, but we perfect ourselves to reconnect, reintegrate to that source. So thank you.
I think someone from the chat, Deputy Grand Master, wanted us to address for Q&A. Brother Short mentioned various schools of mysteries. I know of the schools in Egypt. Are there others, non-African or Egyptian?
Yeah, the Samoth Ricasian, I want to say is how you say it, which was a mystery school that existed in a Greek island. We don't know much about it, but we do have historical contents that they existed. The Chaldean mysteries, which were the Sumerian mysteries that may have either predated or rose up at the same time the Egyptian mysteries were coming about. The grandfather of all mystery schools is really the Vedic mysteries, or institutes, which were kind of like the Christian mysteries, in a sense that they were exoterically presented, but you would have like a monastery with a guru and a process of working through the Vedas to reach a level of enlightenment. Mytheric mysteries, which were Roman, I want to say, and were largely followed by ancient soldiers. The Gnostics, which were another, I believe, another offshoot of Judeo-Christian ideology. The Etheric, I think, is another one that that comes from that same period, early kind of the later Greece. Or actually, I think the Ophiric mysteries, which worked off of poetry and instruction of higher philosophical and spiritual teachings, predated the Dionysian mysteries. And then, of course, you have Pythagoras, who brought his own form of mystery schools back to not Crete, back to his hometown, and I forget off the top of my head where that was. And he was said to have been instructed in the Egyptian mysteries as well. So there are tons of them, and these are just some of the surface mysteries that we know. As Michael had mentioned earlier, in around the 6th century Common Era, I think Emperor Justinian had eradicated the mysteries systematically as the Roman Empire tried to unite under one unified government. But to answer your question, there's
There was also a Jewish mystery school. The Christians had, the Persians had. There was many mystery schools.
I would just like to say that, when it comes to, we were talking about just now the mystery schools. I mean, I think there are many pathways that one can choose, but I think ultimately the destination is probably the same for most of us. So I would just say, pick one, pick the one that works for you, and follow it. And at some point, if it's no longer working for you, then, push it to the side and find one that does work for you. It makes no sense to keep, following a path if it's leading nowhere. So it's okay to change horses in the middle of the stream sometime if you want to go in a different direction.
I'd like to leave it with that. Masonry is what we make of it. And, it's not necessarily wrong. If you're in lodge with a brother who doesn't really want to dig a little bit deeper, the way that they're practicing Masonry isn't necessarily wrong. It's just what they need to do. And just the same way that for all of us, initiation is kind of like pointless if you don't have instruction. And then initiation and instruction is also kind of pointless if you don't have intent. And as Brother Cliff mentioned too, is just like there's something out there for everyone, and find something that works for you, find something that inspires you, and allow that to be the continuation of Masonry, to allow that to be your greater mystery, and see where it takes you.
Well, this has been a special edition of the Craftsmen Online podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening to our reading room. The next reading room will open on Sunday, October 29th at 7 o'clock Eastern. Our panel for that evening will again be Right Worshipful Cliff Jacobs, Brother Jason Shorts, with hosts Right Worshipful Bill Edwards and Very Worshipful Michael LaRocco. A reminder, those meetings are open to the public, so if you know anyone who's a Mason or has an interest in the gentle craft of Freemasonry, let them know they're welcome. If you want to get updates for the reading selection and also the link to join that Zoom meeting, make sure you join our email list at craftsmenonline.com. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.